The iconic house looming over the Bates Motel wasn't built to last. Just two walls stood in for one of cinema's most terrifying locations, borrowed from another set and inspired by a lonely painting. From Mother's severed head, gift wrap pad, to a Paris museum, to Jim Carrey terrorizing tourists in full costume, the Psycho Mansion's backstory is as twisted as Norman Bates himself. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Psycho Bates Mansion. Fact 1. Frankenstein's House of Horror. When you think about one of the most iconic houses in horror movie history, you probably imagine it was carefully designed from scratch to terrify audiences. But the truth behind the Bates Mansion is much more practical and surprisingly scrappy. The house that loomed over Norman Bates and his doomed guests wasn't built as a brand new creation at all. It was actually assembled from pieces of other movie sets that were already sitting around the Universal Studios backlot, kind of like building something out of spare parts you find in your garage. The production of Psycho was a risky project that Paramount Pictures didn't want to fund, so Alfred Hitchcock had to finance it himself. To keep costs down, he used the crew from his television series Alfred Hitchcock Presents and shot the film on a tight budget of only $800,000. This meant the set designers had to get creative, and they turned to what Universal called stock units, pre-existing architectural pieces and set components that could be taken apart and reassembled into new configurations for different productions. The most distinctive feature of the Bates Mansion, that creepy tower that makes the house instantly recognizable, wasn't even originally built for Psycho. That tower section was actually removed from a house set on Colonial Street called the Harvey House, which had been used in the 1950 Jimmy Stewart comedy Harvey. The production designers, Robert Clatworthy and Joseph Hurley, essentially played with these pieces like building blocks, taking walls, windows, and architectural details from various existing sets and piecing them together to create Norman Bates's haunting Victorian home. This recycled approach gave the mansion its unique look while keeping Hitchcock's production costs manageable, proving that sometimes the scariest things come from the most unexpected places. Fact 2. A two-sided illusion. If you watch Psycho carefully, you might notice something strange about the Bates Mansion. You never actually see the right side or the back of the house in the original film. That's because those parts of the building simply didn't exist when the movie was made in 1960. The house that terrified audiences and became one of the most recognizable structures in cinema history was actually just a two-walled facade, consisting of only the front wall and the left side that you see when Norman walks up the hill from the motel. This wasn't a mistake or an oversight. It was a deliberate choice made because the house would only be filmed from angles within a 90-degree span, so there was no need to waste money building parts of the structure that the camera would never see. All the interior scenes showing the inside of the house were filmed on separate sound stages, specifically Stage 18 and Stage 28 at Universal Studios, where complete interior sets could be controlled and lit properly for Hitchcock's precise vision. The house stayed incomplete for 4 years after Psycho became a massive hit. It wasn't until 1964, when Universal began offering their famous studio tour to the public, that they realized tourists would want to see the Psycho house from all angles as the tram drove past. At that point, they added the right side wall specifically for the film Invitation to a Gunfighter, so the house would look complete for visitors. The back of the house remained missing for nearly 2 more decades until 1983, when it was finally constructed for the production of Psycho 2. This means that for 23 years, the most famous house in horror movie history was essentially a Hollywood magic trick, an elaborate optical illusion that fooled millions of moviegoers into believing they were looking at a complete Victorian mansion. Fact 3. Art imitating dread. The haunting design of the Bates Mansion didn't come from Hitchcock's imagination alone. It was directly inspired by a painting that had been hanging in the Museum of Modern Art in New York for 30 years before Psycho was even made. The painting, called House by the Railroad, was created in 1925 by American artist Edward Hopper, who was famous for depicting scenes of isolation and loneliness in modern America. The artwork shows a tall Victorian mansion sitting alone beside railroad tracks, cut off from the world and seemingly abandoned by progress, which was exactly the feeling Hitchcock wanted to capture for Norman Bates's home. Hopper's painting had been one of the first pieces acquired by the Museum of Modern Art when it opened in 1930, and it had influenced countless artists and filmmakers over the decades with its eerie sense of solitude. When Hitchcock saw it, he recognized that it perfectly represented the themes he wanted to explore in Psycho, the idea of being trapped, left behind, and isolated from society. The screenwriter Joseph Stefano later revealed that he told actor Anthony Perkins that if Norman Bates were a painting, he would be painted by Hopper, and Perkins agreed completely with that assessment of the character. While the Bates mansion isn't an exact copy of the house in the painting, the similarities are clear in the skinny, awkward Victorian architecture and the way both structures seem uncomfortable and exposed in their surroundings. Hopper and his wife Jo were reportedly delighted when they learned that Hitchcock had credited their painting as the inspiration for the house in Psycho. The real building that inspired Hopper's painting still stands today in Haverstraw, New York, creating a chain of artistic influence that runs from an actual house built in 1885 through Hopper's canvas and finally to one of cinema's most iconic sets. Fact 4. Mother's head goes to France. Alfred Hitchcock had a dark sense of humor that was famous throughout Hollywood, but one of his most bizarre pranks happened in 1961 when he decided to send a gift to the Cinémathèque Française, which was an internationally renowned film archive and museum in Paris. Without any warning or explanation, Hitchcock packaged up the prop head of Mrs. Bates from Psycho, a realistic-looking skull complete with intact teeth and long gray hair, and mailed it across the Atlantic Ocean to the museum. When an employee at the Cinémathèque opened the small package that had arrived by mail, you can imagine the absolute horror they must have felt upon discovering what appeared to be actual human remains inside. The prop was designed to look disturbingly real for the shocking reveal at the end of Psycho, and the museum worker had no context for what they were looking at or why someone would send such a gruesome item. They searched frantically through the packaging materials, trying to find some kind of note or letter that would explain what this was and where it came from, but there was nothing. For 5 long days, the museum staff was left completely confused and probably deeply disturbed by the mysterious skull sitting in their facility. It wasn't until Henri Langlois, who was the founder and director of the Cinémathèque, finally received a letter from Hitchcock that everything became clear. The letter was written with Hitchcock's characteristic dark wit and simply said, "I hope you received my gift." The prop head remains in the collection of the Cinémathèque Française to this day, where it continues to frighten visitors just as Mrs. Bates frightened moviegoers more than 60 years ago, serving as a permanent reminder of both Psycho's impact on cinema and Hitchcock's mischievous personality. Fact 5. A wandering Victorian nightmare. Unlike most famous movie sets that stay in one place, the Psycho house has actually traveled around the Universal Studios backlot multiple times over the past 6 decades, being completely taken apart and reassembled in different locations like some kind of nomadic haunted mansion. The house has had 3 distinct homes on the studio property, and each move was driven by the changing needs of the backlot and new productions that required the space where it was standing. The house originally sat on a ridge above an area called Laramie Street, positioned on a hill overlooking what was then known as Singapore Lake, which later became the location for the Jaws attraction. It remained in this first spot for about 20 years, from 1960 until December of 1980, becoming one of the most popular stops on the Universal Studio Tour as visitors rode past in trams to catch a glimpse of Norman Bates' infamous home. In 1980, the house was dismantled for the first time when major construction began on the backlot to create City Walk and the new upper lot area. After being carefully taken apart, it was moved to a second location near Falls Lake for the production of Psycho 2 in 1983, which was the first sequel to the original film. At this new spot, the house was finally given a complete back section that had never existed before, and about 30 feet of the Bates Motel was built alongside it, though the rest of the motel in that film was actually just a matte painting. The house moved one final time in the mid-1980s to its current location adjacent to Old Falls Lake, which is actually where the swamp scenes were filmed in the original Psycho movie. It has remained there ever since, continuing to terrify studio tour guests from its third and hopefully final home on the Universal backlot. Fact 6. Norman meets Andy Kaufman. Jim Carrey has always been known for his wild pranks and commitment to staying in character, but he took things to an entirely new level in 1999 while filming the Andy Kaufman biopic, Man on the Moon at Universal Studios. Carrey became so immersed in channeling Kaufman's mischievous energy that he started dressing up as Mother Bates, complete with a gray wig and an old woman's dress, and would leap out from behind the Psycho house wielding an axe to terrify unsuspecting tourists riding past on the studio tour trams. The tour guides and visitors had no idea what was happening when this crazed figure suddenly jumped onto their tram, cackling maniacally like Norman's murderous mother. People would scream in genuine panic until Carrey whipped off his wig and started shaking everyone's hands, revealing that the whole thing was just an elaborate prank. When the tram operators asked the film crew why Carrey kept doing this, they explained that he was trying to channel the creative energy of Andy Kaufman, who was famous for his own outrageous pranks and performance art stunts. Carrey later admitted that he had a lot of fun on the Universal lot and would often break up his workday by jumping on trams and harassing people. But Carrey's most memorable Mother Bates prank was more personal and happened when his friend, comedian Norm Macdonald, came to visit him on set. Carrey arranged for them to have lunch together on the actual porch of the Psycho house. But when Macdonald arrived at the location, he was ambushed by Carrey dressed in full mother costume, doing his best Norman Bates impression. The look of shock and surprise on Macdonald's face was priceless, and Carrey later shared video of the prank after Macdonald's death in 2021 as a tribute to their friendship. Fact 7. Camera tricks from above. One of the most technically challenging shots in Psycho happens near the end of the film when Lila Crane discovers Mother's corpse sitting in the fruit cellar. And filming this crucial scene required the crew to completely dismantle the set in a way that seems almost absurd when you think about the effort involved. To achieve the dramatic overhead camera angle that Hitchcock wanted for this climactic moment, the entire roof of the interior set had to be lifted off and taken apart, so the camera and its operator could fit into the cramped space above the basement room and capture the shot looking straight down. The coordination required for this scene was incredibly complex and took weeks of preparation and testing to get right. The camera needed to start close on Mother's face as Vera Miles spins the chair around, then rapidly pull back and rise up to show the entire chaotic scene as Norman Bates rushes in wearing his mother's clothes with a knife raised. This elaborate camera movement wasn't just Hitchcock showing off his technical skills. It served a very specific purpose in the storytelling that was essential to preserving the film's shocking twist. Hitchcock had already used up most of his tricks to hide the fact that Mother was dead throughout the movie, showing her only as a silhouette in the shower scene, as a shadow in the window, and as just her feet when she attacks the detective on the staircase. He knew that if he used another similar technique to hide her face in the final reveal, the audience would start to catch on and figure out the secret before the big moment. By creating this spectacular overhead shot that was so visually interesting and disorienting, Hitchcock kept viewers distracted and focused on the camera movement itself, which meant they didn't stop to ask themselves the obvious question of why they still weren't getting a clear look at Mother's face. Fact 8. Doppelganger Mansion. When director Gus Van Sant announced he was making a shot-for-shot remake of Psycho in 1998, many people assumed he would simply use the original Bates Mansion that was still standing on the Universal backlot. However, Van Sant's production team made the unusual decision to construct a brand new replica of the house and position it directly in front of the original structure, which meant that for several years, two identical Psycho houses were standing side by side on the studio lot like some kind of eerie mirror image. The production also updated the Bates Motel to make it look like it was from the 1960s to match the period of the remake, even though the film was actually set in 1998. After filming wrapped on Van Sant's controversial remake, which tried to recreate Hitchcock's film almost frame by frame in color, the newer house wasn't immediately demolished. Instead, it was moved to stand right next to the original mansion, creating an incredibly strange sight for tourists riding past on the Universal Studio Tour. 4. Approximately 5 years, from 1998 until around 2003, visitors to Universal Studios could see both versions of the Bates Mansion standing together, which must have been a surreal and somewhat confusing experience. It was like looking at the house and its ghost at the same time, or seeing double after the cameras had stopped rolling. The newer house was eventually torn down in 2003, and the motel was restored to its original appearance to match how it looked in Hitchcock's film. The original Psycho house that was built in 1960 continues to stand at Universal Studios today, having outlasted its doppelganger and remaining one of the most popular and photographed attractions on the studio tour for horror movie fans and film history enthusiasts. Fact 9. Orlando's demolished double. The Psycho house wasn't only famous at Universal Studios Hollywood. For a brief period in the 1990s, there was an identical twin of the mansion standing on the opposite coast at Universal Studios Florida in Orlando. When Universal decided to film Psycho 4, which was subtitled The Beginning, at their newly opened Florida theme park in 1990, they constructed a complete replica of both the Bates house and motel using the exact same blueprints that had been drawn up for the original 1960 film. This was the first full-length feature film production to take place at Universal Studios Florida, and the set was built on a hill in an area of the park called the Expo Center, where it loomed over attractions like E.T. Adventure and Back to the Future, The Ride. The production was scheduled so that outdoor filming happened after the theme park had already opened to guests in June of 1990, which meant park visitors could actually watch a real movie being made and even caught glimpses of Anthony Perkins reprising his iconic role as Norman Bates. Director Mick Garris said that they were as much a theme park attraction as they were a movie production because of all the spectators who gathered to watch the filming. After production wrapped, Universal kept the house and motel standing as a popular photo opportunity and attraction for several years. The set was also used for Halloween Horror Nights events, giving it a second life as a haunted house experience. However, as Universal Studios Florida expanded and needed more space for new attractions, the company decided that the large plot of land occupied by the Psycho set would be better used for something else. In 1998, just 8 years after it was built, the Florida Psycho house was demolished to make way for Curious George Goes to Town, a children's play area. Fact 10. Lon Chaney's legacy location. There's a fascinating connection between the Bates Mansion and one of Universal's most legendary silent horror films that adds an extra layer of spooky history to the already creepy house. According to historical sources, the original Bates Motel and house set buildings were constructed on the exact same stage where Lon Chaney's classic silent film, The Phantom of the Opera, was filmed back in 1925, which means the ground where Norman Bates committed his fictional murders had already been home to one of cinema's most famous horror villains more than 3 decades earlier. Lon Chaney was known as the Man of 1,000 Faces because of his incredible ability to transform himself with makeup and prosthetics, and his portrayal of the disfigured phantom living beneath the Paris Opera House became one of the most iconic performances in silent film history. The unmasking scene where his character's horrifying face is revealed to the audience was genuinely shocking for moviegoers in the 1920s and helped establish Universal Studios as the premier studio for horror films during that era. By the time Alfred Hitchcock arrived at Universal to make Psycho in 1960, the studio had a long and rich tradition of creating terrifying movies that pushed boundaries and frightened audiences in new ways. The fact that the Bates house and motel were built on the same stage where the Phantom had lurked and terrorized people 35 years earlier creates a direct lineage between these two landmark horror productions. It's almost as if the stage itself had absorbed some of that dark creative energy from Chaney's performance and passed it along to Anthony Perkins and the crew working on Psycho, linking 2 different generations of Universal horror films through the physical space where they were created. Fact 11. Mother Goes to the Beach. The Bates Mansion has appeared in many different productions over the decades, but perhaps the strangest and most unexpected transformation happened in 1981, when the famous horror house got a complete makeover for a comedy film starring Chevy Chase called Modern Problems. The production team painted the entire exterior of the Gothic Victorian mansion a bright pink color and staged it to look like it had somehow been transported from its usual hilltop location to a sunny beach setting, which was about as far from the dark and menacing atmosphere of Psycho as you could possibly get. Modern Problems was a comedy about an air traffic controller who gains telekinetic powers after being exposed to nuclear waste. And apparently the plot required this bizarre visual of the Psycho house sitting incongruously by the ocean. The site of the iconic mansion, which had terrified audiences for more than 20 years by that point, now painted in cheerful pink and surrounded by sand and surf, must have been completely jarring for anyone who recognized it from Hitchcock's masterpiece. This transformation happened during a period when the house was between its first and second locations on the Universal backlot. In December of 1980, the mansion had been dismantled from its original spot above Laramie Street, and major construction work was underway across the studio lot to create City Walk and renovate various areas. The pink paint job for Modern Problems was just one of the many changes the house went through during this transitional period, before it was eventually moved to its second location near Falls Lake and restored to its more familiar, dark, and ominous appearance for the production of Psycho 2 in 1983. Fact 12. Victorian makeover for TV. While the Psycho house is famous for its dark, foreboding appearance that makes it look isolated and sinister, there was one production that completely flipped that image on its head and turned the Bates Mansion into something elegant and welcoming. In 1976, the house was given a major renovation for a television miniseries called Captains and the Kings, which starred Richard Jordan, Patty Duke, Robert Vaughn, and Jane Seymour, and told the story of a wealthy Irish immigrant family rising to power in America. For this production, the Psycho house received a complete restoration that included fresh paint and repairs to any weathered or damaged sections that had accumulated over 16 years of sitting on the backlot exposed to the elements. But the most dramatic change was the addition of a large wraparound porch that extended around multiple sides of the house, which completely transformed its appearance from a stark and unwelcoming Gothic structure into the kind of grand Victorian mansion where you could imagine wealthy families hosting elegant parties and entertaining distinguished guests on warm summer evenings. This was essentially the opposite of everything Hitchcock and his designers had intended when they created the Bates Mansion to represent isolation, decay, and psychological darkness. The wraparound porch made the house look sociable and inviting, suggesting a home where people would gather and connect rather than hide away from the world. The transformation shows just how versatile movie sets can be when different productions need them for completely different purposes and tones. After Captains and the Kings finished filming, the porch and the restored appearance remained for several years while the house continued to sit in its original location above Laramie Street on the Universal backlot, and tourists riding past on the studio tour during the late 1970s would have seen this much fancier version of Norman Bates's home. Fact 13. The permanent guest. If you take the Universal Studios Hollywood tour today and the tram drives past the Psycho house, there's a special detail you should watch for that has been delighting and frightening visitors for decades. When you look up at the second-floor window of the upstairs bedroom, you can see the dark silhouette of Mother Bates still sitting in her rocking chair, gently moving back and forth just like she did in the original film when Norman would claim she was resting or didn't want to be disturbed. This isn't just a temporary decoration that gets put up for special events or Halloween season. It's a permanent fixture that has been installed in the window to maintain the eerie atmosphere of the house and give tourists that authentic feeling of being watched by someone or something that shouldn't be there. The silhouette captures one of the most unsettling elements from Hitchcock's film, where audiences would catch glimpses of what they thought was Norman's elderly mother moving around in the windows of the house, never knowing that what they were seeing was actually Norman himself, dressed in her clothes and pretending to be her. Tour guides often point out the window to visitors and encourage them to look closely, and many people report getting genuine chills when they spot the figure rocking slowly in the shadows, especially if they're fans of the original movie and remember how that simple image was used to build suspense and dread throughout Psycho. The detail shows how Universal Studios has worked to preserve not just the physical structure of the Bates Mansion, but also the psychological atmosphere that made it so memorable and frightening in the first place, ensuring that even more than 60 years after the film's release, Mother Bates is still keeping watch over her house and her son. Fact 14. Matty Magic Deception. When Psycho 2 was filmed in 1983, the production needed to show the Bates Motel looking run-down and abandoned after years of being closed. But instead of building the entire motel structure from scratch, the filmmakers used a clever visual effects technique that saved money while still creating a convincing illusion on screen. Only about 30 to 40 feet of the actual physical motel building was constructed on the backlot, which was just enough to include the office and a few of the guest room doors where actors would be filmed walking in and out. Everything else that appeared beyond that small section, the rest of the motel rooms extending down the line, the parking area, and the surrounding landscape, was created using something called a matte painting. This is a traditional special effects technique where artists paint detailed images on glass or other materials that are then photographed or filmed in a way that makes them blend seamlessly with the real physical set pieces. When done skillfully, audiences watching the finished movie have no idea that most of what they're looking at doesn't actually exist in three-dimensional space. This meant that when viewers watched Psycho 2 and saw what appeared to be the complete Bates Motel sitting beneath the house, just like it did in the original film, roughly 60% of what they were seeing was actually just a flat painted image rather than a real structure you could walk through. The technique was so effective that most people watching the movie wouldn't notice the deception unless someone pointed it out to them. This kind of cost-cutting measure was common in Hollywood filmmaking before computer-generated imagery became the standard way to create environments and extend sets, and it shows how practical movie magic could achieve impressive results with artistic skill and careful camera work. Fact 15. Hollywood's most versatile Victorian. While most people associate the Psycho house exclusively with Norman Bates and his murderous mother, the truth is that this Victorian mansion has had one of the busiest careers in Hollywood history, appearing in dozens and dozens of different television shows, films, and commercials that have nothing to do with horror or the Psycho franchise. The house became such a convenient and recognizable piece of standing architecture on the Universal backlot that producers would regularly write it into their scripts whenever they needed a creepy old house, a wealthy family's estate, or just an interesting Victorian-era building. The mansion showed up in the popular mystery series Murder, She Wrote, where Angela Lansbury's character Jessica Fletcher would investigate crimes in various settings. It appeared in an episode of the action show Knight Rider from 1984 called Halloween Night, where you can see the house sitting hazily at the end of Falls Lake. The medical drama Emergency used the Psycho house in a 1972 episode called Brushfire, and the Western television series Laredo featured it during the show's run in the mid-1960s, proving that the house could work just as well in period westerns as it did in contemporary thrillers. Beyond these television appearances, the house was also used in countless commercials and smaller film productions over the decades, taking on different identities and serving different narrative purposes depending on what each production needed. Sometimes it would be dressed up to look elegant and welcoming, while other times it would lean into its naturally creepy atmosphere. This versatility and the fact that it was always available right there on the Universal lot made it an incredibly valuable asset for the studio, transforming what started as a budget-saving set for one low-budget film into one of the most frequently photographed and filmed pieces of architecture in entertainment history.